Isolde had 4 seconds before the claws would reach her. She knew, because she'd counted them 41 times before. The throne hall's lamp oil caught in Kale's eyes first, a wet orange flare that meant the black was already crawling up through his pupils. "Kale!" She didn't raise her voice. Shouting had never once worked. His claws came through the space where her ribs used to be. She looked down at the tear in her bodice with something closer to irritation than fear, and then she wasn't looking at anything at all. She woke to a ceiling she'd memorized down to the water stain, shaped like a fox. The mantel clock ticked its rose-carved gears through 6 a.m., unbothered, the way it was every morning of every day that had never technically happened before. Isolde reached for the notepad on her nightstand and wrote, in handwriting gone efficient from repetition, Run 42 failed. Throne Hall, dusk. 4-second window, same as 39 and 40. Mira knocked twice and let herself in without waiting, which meant she already suspected. You've got that face again. What face? The one where you've died recently. Mira set down the wash basin. Physician's assistant came by an hour early with the morning log. His Highness's tutors moved the war council up. Noon instead of dusk. Isolde's pen stopped. Which means, Mira said, watching her carefully, whatever you've been counting on happening at dusk might happen at noon instead. Isolde was already standing, already reaching for yesterday's dress, because it was, technically, also today's. How early is early? 6 hours, my lady. 6 hours she hadn't planned for. 42 runs of data, and the ground had just moved under all of it. She dressed quickly, mind already running the arithmetic of a compressed day. Which corridors she could still reach, which conversations she'd have to abandon, which pieces of her plan simply wouldn't survive 6 missing hours. Every run taught her something. This one was teaching her, before breakfast, that she still didn't know enough. She spent the morning at her writing desk, 6 pins driven into a map of the palace, each one marking a place Kale's episodes had started across 41 deaths. The training yard, the east stair, twice the war room, once, memorably, the chapel. She moved the 6th pin 2 inches west, toward the library, and stared at the gap it left. The book under her elbow was older than the pins. Its spine cracked along a title she'd stopped reading and started using as a paperweight, on the weaving of chronological gears. Most of it was equations she didn't need. But near the back, in an appendix she'd skipped every previous time, a paragraph on old marriage rites caught her eye. Something about vows spoken over anchor stones, binding 2 fates to 1 clock. She read it twice, filed it under irrelevant court trivia, and moved on. A wedding was the last thing on the list of things that could save either of them today. Mira appeared in the doorway, holding her sewing box like a shield. You're doing the thing where you talk to a book instead of me. I talk to you plenty. You talk at me. There's a difference. Mira set the box down. The hairpin you left in here yesterday, it's still on the shelf. Same spot. Isolde went still. She hadn't told Mira to check that. You told me to check it, Mira said, reading her face. 40 runs ago. I just never forgot. Something small and cold and enormous unfolded in Isolde's chest. If the hairpin held its place through a reset, so could other things. So could, possibly, more than things. She spent the rest of the morning testing it in small ways. A ribbon tied to the library shelf. A coin pressed into a crack in the stone windowsill. Cataloging which anchors held and which didn't. Building a private theory she had no one to share yet, except a maid who'd apparently been humoring her for 40 runs without ever once being asked to stop. She found Captain Doran in the armory, oiling a blade, and cornered him the way she'd learned to corner people who preferred not to be cornered. I'm asking when he sleeps. You're asking when the monster sleeps. Wrong question. Doran set the blade down. His Highness writes letters most nights, has for years. To whom? His brother. A pause, deliberate. Who's been dead 9 years? He doesn't send them, Doran added, watching her reaction with the flat interest of a man conducting his own quiet experiment. Just writes them, burns them by morning. That's not useful information. Didn't say it was useful. Said it was true. Doran picked the blade back up. You've been treating him like a door with a lock you haven't found yet. Doors don't grieve, my lady. Isolde had built 4 pages of notes on trigger points and moon cycles and the angle of afternoon light through the war room's east window. None of it had accounted for a man sitting alone at a desk, writing to someone who couldn't write back. She left the armory faster than she meant to, and it took her the whole corridor back to admit, quietly, to no one, that the version of Kale in her notes had never once, in 42 attempts, been allowed to be sad. She thought about that the rest of the walk back. How easy it had been to reduce a grieving man to a set of coordinates and timings, and how uncomfortable it was to realize the reduction had been hers, not his. The War Council convened at noon exactly, in the long chamber with its map-covered table and its cold hearth that never seemed to warm the room, no matter the season, and Isolde walked in uninvited, which earned her 4 expressions of disapproval and 1 raised eyebrow from Kale himself, who clearly hadn't expected her and wasn't entirely sure whether to be annoyed or relieved. Lady Vane. This session doesn't require a duchess's opinion on troop movement. It doesn't need to. I'm here about the noon shift in schedule. You've been informed of council timing changes. That was the regent, seated at Kale's right, his tone the mild, unbothered courtesy of a man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Is there a concern, my lady? There was every concern, and none she could say aloud. Your nephew is about to become a weapon in this room, and I've counted 41 ways it's gone wrong before. No concern, she said instead. Only curiosity. Kale's eyes found hers across the table, and for 1 unguarded second something in them recognized her the way you recognize weather before it turns. Then a servant dropped a stack of maps near the hearth, sharp and metallic, and Kale's hand closed, white-knuckled around the table's edge. Highness? Doran. Already moving. I'm fine. He wasn't. I saw they could see the black starting to bloom at the edge of his irises, hours early, the whole careful architecture of her 42 runs collapsing in real time. She stood. We should adjourn. We will finish this session, the regent said pleasantly, as scheduled. Kale's chair scraped back hard enough to crack the floor tile beneath it. She didn't have a plan. She had 41 deaths and a hairpin that remembered things it shouldn't, and she used both. Everyone out, she said, and said it again louder when no one moved fast enough. Fear of a monster is a language everyone speaks fluently. Kale was on his knees by the time the room cleared, hands pressed to his own skull like he could hold the black in by force. Go, he said, or tried to. It came out in 2 voices layered over each other. I'm not going to. I killed you yesterday. He didn't know it had been that morning. That yesterday didn't apply to a day that reset. He couldn't. You'll kill me today, too, probably, she said, crouching to his level, close enough that Doran, watching from the doorway, made a sound of protest he swallowed before it became a word. But not in the next 30 seconds. I've been counting. Something in the wrongness of that steadied him, just slightly, the specificity of it, the sheer absurd calm. His breath came ragged. You're insane. I've been told. She reached for his hand. Not to soothe him, just to anchor him, pressure and contact, a fixed point in a room trying to come apart. His claws had already started. She felt one open, a thin line across her palm, and didn't let go. The black receded, 1 inch, then 2. How? He said, hoarse, human again, staring at her hand, still gripping his. Did you know that would work? She hadn't. But she filed the lie away for later and said nothing at all. From the corridor window, Regent Ashvale watched the Duchess walk his nephew back toward his chambers, unhurried, her bloodied hand tucked discreetly against her skirts. She contained it, his steward said, at his shoulder. Faster than the physicians ever have. Yes. The regent turned the word over like a coin he didn't like the weight of. She did. He had built the curse's leash carefully, over years, calibrated so Kale's episodes stayed frequent enough to keep the boy dependent on his uncle's protection, and rare enough that no one asked why a cure had never once been attempted. A frightened prince was a governable prince. A prince who could be talked down by a duchess with a hairpin and a straight face was a different problem entirely. Increase her household detail, he said, quietly. I want to know everywhere she goes and who she speaks to. She's done nothing but help him, my lord. That, the regent said, is precisely the concern. She's done nothing but help him, my lord, the steward had said, and the regent had heard the words and dismissed the reasoning behind them entirely. He did not believe, yet, that she knew anything about the curse's true architecture. But he had not stayed regent for 11 years, by waiting to be certain before he acted. A woman that lucky was rarely only lucky, and 11 years in this particular chair had taught him that the safest response to an anomaly was always to watch it closely before deciding whether it was a threat. The court physician wrapped her hand without asking questions, which told her exactly how routine a wounded duchess had become in this household. "You should let someone else sit with him during the dusk hours," he said. "It's not a duchess's duty. It's not anyone's duty. It's just useful for it to be mine." Isolde flexed her fingers, testing the wrap. "Has anyone else managed to talk him down before?" "Not in the 11 years I've served here." "Not once." Kale found her in the corridor an hour later, composure fully restored in the unnerving way it always was after an episode. "You should have let Doran handle it." "Doran's never handled it. Doran's watched it happen to other people's hands for years. That landed somewhere." His jaw tightened. "I don't remember most of what happens when it takes me, but I remember your hand not moving. I have decent reflexes." "You didn't move it away," he said, and the correction mattered, and she understood this was the closest he'd ever come to asking a question he didn't know how to phrase. "Why didn't you?" She didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie or a confession, so she offered him neither. "Dusk's in 3 hours. I'll be in the West Solar." "You don't have to be." "I know." She left before he could ask again. Because the truth, that she wanted to be there for reasons that had stopped being strategic somewhere around Run 39, was a door she wasn't ready to open. The West Solar smelled of beeswax candles and the particular dust of a room used only at dusk, shelves of unread books lining one wall, the window seat worn soft from years of a prince who came here to wait out his own worst hours alone. Kale arrived early tonight, which he'd never done before in any run she remembered. "You hum," he said, without preamble. "When you're nervous." Something in a minor key. Isolde's pen stopped over her notes. She hadn't hummed anything today. Not this run. "I don't hum." "You did." He frowned at his own certainty. "I don't know when. I don't know why I know that." The candle guttered in a draft that shouldn't have existed in a sealed room, and Isolde sat very still, because in Run 38, she remembered this now, sharp and sudden. She had hummed exactly that, waiting for dusk in this exact seat, and he had not been in the room to hear it. "You're pale," Kale said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether the thing she'd been doing to save his life had started leaving marks on him that shouldn't be there." "About the noon shift in schedule," she said instead. "Whether it'll happen again tomorrow." He studied her the way he'd started studying her lately. Not for danger anymore, but for something he couldn't classify and clearly resented not being able to. "You lie carefully," he said. "I'll give you that. High praise." It wasn't meant as praise. But something in his mouth, almost a smile, suggested it had been anyway. And Isolde looked back down at her notes and wrote nothing at all, because there was no page in any of her 42 run logs prepared for a Kale who remembered a hum she'd only ever hummed for herself, alone, in a version of Today That. As far as she knew, no longer existed anywhere but in her own head. "I want to ask you something," Kale said, later, as the dusk light through the solar window went the deep orange that meant the window was closing. "And I want an honest answer, not a careful one. Why does a duchess with a household to protect and a marriage market to survive spend her dusk hours locked in a room with a man who's killed people?" The question sat between them, plain and unguarded in a way his questions never usually were, and Isolde felt the shape of an answer rise in her chest. Something true, something she hadn't let herself say, even to Mira, even to the notepad she wrote her failures in every morning. "Because," she started. The candle flame bent sideways, though no window was open, and Kale's hand curled into a fist before either of them registered the shift. "Not now," he said, low, furious at his own body's timing. "Not now. Kale, go!" The word came out in the doubled register, the black already threading up through him faster than either of them had prepared for. "Isolde, go!" It was the first time he'd used her given name, unranked, unguarded, and she heard it land in the same half-second that his claws split the arm of his own chair to splinters. Whatever she'd been about to say went back down, her throat unspoken, buried under the much older, much simpler instinct to run. Lady Phalis had a way of entering a room that made the room rearrange itself around her without her seeming to try, and she did it now, settling into the seat beside Kale at breakfast. Highness. A small, precise smile. My father sends his regards, and a proposal, which I've been asked to deliver in person because he trusts me to make it sound less transactional than it is. Lady Siren. Kale's tone was courteous, distant. I'm aware of the proposal. My uncle's mentioned it 3 times this month. Then you know House Phalis brings the Western trade routes and 40 years of loyalty that's never once wavered. Saren's eyes flicked, briefly, to Isolde across the table. Not hostile, exactly, but assessing, the way one measures a hedge before deciding whether to clear it or go around. Lady Vane, I don't believe we've spoken. We haven't. You've been keeping the prince company during his difficult hours. I hear. Saren's tone stayed light. That's generous of you. It's practical, Isolde said, matching the lightness, giving nothing away. Practical. Seren turned back to Kale. Think on the proposal, Highness. My father would like an answer before the harvest court. She left as smoothly as she'd arrived, and Isolde felt something ugly and unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Not fear of losing an argument, but fear of losing a claim she'd never once, out loud, admitted to holding. She told herself it didn't matter, that a political marriage was exactly the kind of complication her 42 run should have already prepared her for. She didn't believe herself even as she thought it. It got worse in the receiving hall, in front of exactly the right size of audience to matter. It's rather convenient, Seren said. How often Lady Vane finds herself alone with His Highness during his private hours. One wonders what a woman with no household fortune of her own hopes to gain from such devotion. The accusation landed clean and public, in front of an audience of exactly the right size to matter, and Isolde let it land, because she had learned, across 42 deaths, that the fastest way to lose an argument in this court was to look like you needed to win it. I make no claim on His Highness's time beyond what keeps him breathing, she said, evenly, which I understand is more than most in this hall have offered. A ripple of discomfort moved through the hall, not quite in her favor, not quite against her. How admirable, Seren said. Selfless, even. Isolde said nothing further. She had learned this, too. That silence, held long enough, made other people fill it. It was Kale, arriving late and unannounced, who filled the silence. Lady Vane was in that room 3 nights ago because I asked her to be, he said, and because the only person in this hall who's kept me from killing someone during an episode is standing exactly where Lady Phalis just implied she shouldn't be. The hall went very still. Seren's composure cracked, briefly, at the edges. My apologies, Highness. I misjudged the arrangement. You did, Kale said, and didn't soften it. Isolde stood in the center of the hall, feeling something unlock in her chest that had nothing to do with strategy at all. I need to tell you something, Kale said, finding her in the library among the pins and the cracked spine book, and I need you to not look at me like I'm relapsing. I make no promises. I remember things that haven't happened. He said it flatly. Your hum. A scar on your palm before you had one. A conversation about noon council schedules I don't recall us having yet, except I do, except it hasn't occurred. Isolde set down her pen very carefully. The next thing she said would either close a door she'd kept shut for 42 runs or open one she couldn't take back. It has occurred, she said. Just not today. Not this version of today. He didn't laugh, which she'd half expected, and didn't accuse her of madness, which she'd also half expected. He just watched her, waiting, the way he'd watched her handle his hand in the War Council weeks ago, assessing, not for danger this time, but for the shape of a truth he already half believed before she'd finished saying it. How many times, he said. 42. 43, counting this one, if it fails like the others. And I die in most of them. You die in all of them. I die in most of them. She made herself hold his eyes. The versions where you remember something. That's new. That's never happened before Run 38. Kale was quiet a long moment. So somewhere in 42 mornings I don't remember, he said finally, I've apparently started falling for the woman keeping me alive. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. If I remember loving you, Kale said later, in a corridor where neither of them had any legitimate reason to still be standing, in loops I don't have access to, does that make it real, or does it make it something you built? I didn't build anything. I can't make you feel a thing you don't already feel. You've had 42 attempts to learn exactly what makes me feel things. That's not nothing, Isolde. She flinched, because he was right. Because the flaw she'd never once let herself name out loud, that she'd been engineering his affection the way she engineered everything else, sat exposed in the space between them now. I've studied you, she admitted. I won't pretend otherwise. I know which words steady you and which ones don't. I know you write letters to your brother and burn them before dawn. That's not an answer to my question. No. She made herself say the rest, unscripted, which cost her more than any of the 42 deaths had. But somewhere between Run 38 and today, it stopped being a strategy and started being the only thing I actually look forward to. I just know I'd rather die tonight than stop finding out. Kale's jaw worked, some old guardedness fighting something newer. That's a terrible thing to say to a man who might kill you before midnight. I know, she said. I said it anyway. The regent had noted, with growing unease, that the Duchess's success rate at containing his nephew's episodes had reached 100%, a statistic that should have comforted him and instead did the opposite. The War Council needs a demonstration of the prince's fitness to rule, he told his steward. Public enough that the court sees exactly how contained he can be. Without Lady Vane present, you want to trigger it. I want to remind the court what they're protected from and who protects them. A pause. And if it goes wrong without her there, we've learned something useful about his limits and lost nothing we weren't already prepared to risk. He did not think of it as cruelty. He thought of it as calibration. The same careful, patient instinct that had built the leash in the first place applied now to a girl who had started proving, one contained episode at a time, that the leash wasn't as necessary as the court needed to keep believing it was. The guards at the council hall doors were new, reassigned that same morning, and they did not move when Isolde approached. Lady Vane isn't on the admittance list today. Regent's orders, my lady. Through the doors, she could hear the low murmur of the full court assembling. More voices than a routine session warranted. Mira arrived, breathless. They moved the whole council into the great hall. All of it. Every noble house that matters. Why? I don't know. But Isolde. Mira rarely used her given name. The regent requested it specifically. This morning, Isolde stood outside a locked door, understanding with flat, cold clarity that whatever was about to happen in that hall had been built specifically around her absence. She got in through the servants' passage no one had thought to guard. No one expected a duchess to know it existed, and arrived in time to see Kale on his knees at the center of the great hall, the black already flooding his eyes, the court gathered in a wide, horrified ring around him, none of them moving to help, all of them watching the way people watch something they've been told for years to fear. And the regent stood at the edge of it all, close enough to have caused it, calm enough to have planned it down to the minute. You did this, she said, loud enough that half the hall turned toward her instead of the spectacle. Lady Vane, this is a private council matter. You moved the session up. You barred me. You reassigned Doran. And now, conveniently, my absence is the reason he's on the floor in front of 40 witnesses. She crossed the hall without asking permission from anyone. That's not a curse acting on its own. That's a leash, pulled on schedule. A dramatic accusation? An accurate one. How long have you been triggering it yourself? The regent's composure held, but something underneath it surfaced for the first time in front of witnesses. A prince this dangerous needs to remain a prince this dependent, he said, quietly. That is not cruelty, Lady Vane. That is government. It's a leash, she said again, and you've just proven it in front of the entire court. She crouched to Kale's level, 40 witnesses watching. You're not doing this to me, she said, low, only for him. You're doing it to a room full of people who need to see you come back from it. So come back. His claws had already opened one line across her forearm before she finished speaking, and she didn't pull away. You didn't do this. He did. I need you to hear that while you're still choosing which one of us you believe. Something in the black receded, slower than before, harder won, but real. and the hall had gone entirely silent by the time his eyes cleared enough to focus on her face. "She's telling the truth," Kale said, hoarse, to the room. "My uncle knew exactly when this would happen. He arranged for her not to be here." The regent's mild expression didn't crack. But Isolde saw Serin Phalis, near the front, go very still. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking after the council hall, and it took her longer than it should have to realize it wasn't fear. "You're pale," Mira said, unwrapping the claw mark on her forearm. "Paler than the cut explains. I'm tired. You're always tired. This is different." Mira held her wrist a beat longer than necessary. "How many times now?" 42 runs. 43. This one, if it holds. And every single one, you reset with a new day and an old body. Mira's voice had lost its usual dry edge. What if it's not new? What if it's the same body, 43 times over, and it's just been quietly running out? Isolde had felt the fatigue before and filed it under manageable, address later. She hadn't let herself do the arithmetic on what 43 later meant if it never reset the way the day itself did. Outside, the palace bells rang the hour, and for the first time since run 1, Isolde understood the clock she'd spent 42 runs studying wasn't only counting Kale's time. It was counting hers too. And unlike his, hers had never once reset to 0. She sat with that for a long time after Mira left, turning it over the way she turned over every piece of unwelcome data, looking for an angle that made it less true. She didn't find one. Serin found her in the solar, unexpected enough that Isolde set down her pen and waited without speaking. "I owe you an apology," Serin said, without the usual court smoothing. "For the receiving hall. For implying you'd manufactured your access to him. You don't owe me anything. You did what your father needed. I did what I was afraid not to do." Serin's composure cracked at one visible seam. "You don't understand what it is to be a house's only leverage, Lady Vane. I've known about the regent's arrangements with Kale's condition for over a year." Isolde went very still. He took her hand, the one still faintly scarred from the first time she'd anchored him. "Say the true thing, unscripted. The one you didn't say in the solar, before the episode interrupted you." She had spent 43 runs treating every word to him as a calculation, and it took her longer than it should have to let one arrive without engineering it first. "I don't want to save you because it's the only way to survive today," she said, her voice shaking, unrehearsed, nothing like the flat command register she'd used on every prior loop. "I want to survive today because it means I get to keep choosing you tomorrow. That's not strategy. I don't have a plan past this. I just don't want a version of any day where I'm not standing exactly here." The stone under their joined hands warmed, slow and real, nothing like the cold silence of the failed attempt. A low mechanical thrum rising from somewhere underneath the palace's oldest foundations, gears they'd never seen turning in answer to something that hadn't been engineered at all. Isolde. Kale's voice broke on her name for the first time since he'd first used it, unranked, unguarded, weeks ago in a different loop she still carried and he never would. "I choose you. Every version of today, every run you don't remember telling me, all of it, I choose this one on purpose." The clock on the mantle, hers, his, the whole palace's, did not reset at midnight. It simply kept ticking, the way clocks were supposed to, forward and only forward, into a morning neither of them had ever actually been allowed to reach before. Midnight came and went, and Isolde woke the next morning to the same ceiling, the same fox-shaped water stain, and a body that ached in a way she recognized now as the accumulated cost of 43 runs that had never, until last night, been allowed to actually end. Kale was already awake beside her, watching her the way he'd started watching her weeks ago. Not for danger anymore, just for the specific fact of her continuing to exist in the same day he did. "You're still tired," he said, quiet. "I don't think that goes away." She flexed her hand, the old scar there permanent in a way scars were supposed to be. "Mira thinks the fatigue is lasting. Might always be lasting." Kale was already awake beside her, watching her the way he'd started watching her weeks ago. Not for danger, not anymore, just for the specific fact of her continuing to exist in the same day he did. "Then we'll build around it." He said it simply, the way he said most things now, without the old guardedness. "You spent 43 days learning how to survive mine. I can spend however many I have learning how to survive yours." Outside, the palace bells rang the hour, ordinary, uncounted, no longer a countdown to anything. The regent under formal review and stripped of the mechanism that had let him rule from behind a curse for 11 years. Serin's house standing, bruised but intact, beside them rather than against them, and a mantle clock ticking steadily forward instead of resetting back to a morning that had already happened 43 times before. Isolde had spent her first life dying alone, having built a whole existence around never needing anyone enough to be left by them. She understood now that the vow hadn't cured anything. It had simply made the risk permanent, made loving him a fact rather than a strategy, with all the cost and none of the reset that came before. She found she didn't want it back the old way. Not the clean resets, not the endless second chances, not the version of herself who needed a countdown to justify staying anywhere at all. Say it wasn't a trick, Kale said. That you're staying because you want to, not because the ritual left you no other choice. I'm staying, Isolde said, because for the first time in 43 mornings, I get to. And she meant it the way she'd never let herself mean anything before, without a plan for what came after, without an exit already mapped, without any version of tomorrow that didn't start exactly here.